What you see might not necessarily be what is implied.
They're children. They can't really handle the kind of media attention.
Are we expecting them to carry responsibilities they were never trained for?
People provide carelessly simplistic solutions to quite complex issues.
When reporting or discussing or blogging or sending out social media messages, we need to be cautious because every person is innocent until proven guilty.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Headlines. We go to space for the top stories that meet the headlines and more. I am Amalina, Kamal.
And I'm Elena, Koshy.
Now this week, we were once again confronted with devastating news that a lot of us are still finding it difficult to process. Now another stabbing incident has left us with many questions. Uncomfortable one indeed, of course, what went wrong, who's to blame, and have we prevented such violence from happening? Because as a society, we have to ask ourselves, are we so distant in ensuring that the safe spaces that we live in are truly safe?
I mean, I can naturally, understand why most of us are in shock. When something like this happens, our first instinct, of course, is to look for answers. So this conversation is not just about one particular incident, and we're not even going to, talk about the details of the case. Instead, we are looking at the bigger picture, the systems around our children, how we understand behavior and respond to trauma.
Right, and that's why we have actually dedicated the time today, right, Elena, to really ask ourselves, like what we've said, whether the country's current approach is truly safe and inclusive. Of course, here on set with us, we have two incredible guests. First up, clinical psychologist Prashanth Vasantha Kumar. Thank you so much, Prashanth, for being here.
Thank you very much.
And we also have on the set Chrishanthini Sebastiampillai, a lawyer and an advocate for the rights and inclusion of persons with disabilities. So welcome to the set.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we begin and deep dive into this particular discourse, right, I think I need to give our audience a quick note. Of course, the discussion, as Elena mentioned, will not address the facts, evidence, individuals of concern that are involved, or legal proceedings of any matter, because instead we want to focus on the broader issue here, involving child protection, disability rights, and of course mental health support on top of whatever we're going to discuss later on. School safety is one of it. And I want to begin with this particular question to Prashanth. In Malaysia, I mean, the idea of being inclusive has been thrown around a lot, right? Not just among us as the general populace, but leaders, policymakers. However, how true is it when we look into our acceptance or response towards the neurodivergent community here?
So I think it has gotten better over the last 5 or 6 years or so. Over, at least in my experience, having worked in the NGO space the last 4+ years or so, what we can see among the general population, cutting across lots of different demographics, is there seems to be a bit more interest and keenness to want to know more about mental health in general. I think when we talk about neurodivergence specifically, that's maybe a little bit more specific, and not as many people would be familiar with those terms yet. But when we talk about mental health more broadly, I think there's generally been a lot more interest to know more about the ins and outs of all that. I think we can trace that back to our experience during COVID-19, during the pandemic, where we were all stuck at home. We were forced to confront things which maybe we would rather not confront, and we were stuck in a particular space with either ourselves or with our families, and that led to a lot of things cropping up personally. Lots of stress and other types of life challenges came to the fore, and I think since then there's been a lot more recognition about the importance of mental health in particular. Neurodivergence probably not nearly as much, but it was quite encouraging actually to see. I think on the first day of this parliamentary sitting, they allocated quite a big block of time to talk about where our needs are greatest when it comes to mental health in general, both in the morning and I think the afternoon session as well. And there seems to be across the aisle interest in trying to address this issue. So that was quite encouraging to see. So it has gotten better. Neurodivergence, probably we still have a ways to go to educate the public, even elected officials, about what we mean and what is needed to be put in place.
Because we bandy these terms a lot, right? Neurodivergence and these words, and maybe not many of us can actually fully comprehend what it means or what is it all about. Maybe you can just give us a brief, explanation of what it is.
Sure. So neurodivergence as a term, it's important to note for anyone who's watching or listening that it is not a clinical diagnosis on its own. It is simply an umbrella term used to refer to many different individuals struggling with many different types of challenges. Most normally, it is referring to people who have been diagnosed with various types of neurodevelopmental conditions. Right? So that's quite a big category. Normally, when we say that, we are referring to people who have been diagnosed with either autism or autism spectrum disorder is the full name, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive.
That's why you have the term on the spectrum,
disorder.
Yeah, in simple way of understanding it all.
Yeah, and that's just that particular spectrum. There's a lot of other people with various other types of challenges, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, even things like Tourette syndrome, if you've heard of that. That normally gets grouped into the neurodivergent category.
Dyslexia as well.
Dyslexia and dyscalculia and a bunch of other. Those are learning challenges, learning disabilities. Some definitions from abroad, they expand that term to even include other types of mental health conditions, things like OCD or bipolar disorder. So again, as you said, there's a lot of terms being bandied about here, and if we want to hone in on any of them later on, I think we can go ahead and do that. But generally speaking, when we talk about neurodivergence, we are referring to this large cluster of individuals who have been diagnosed with those conditions.
The conditions, yeah. Chris, I want to go to you, especially when we understand the layers of it all, right, in terms of the behavior. Our attitudes need to also shift a little bit, because it might not be what you see might not necessarily be what is implied, right? Even how we treat a person that is neurodivergent in terms of what is acceptable and what's not. And when we put the element of criminality there, right? How important is it for us as the general public to ensure that we don't amplify stigma or amplify certain prejudice towards this community?
Okay, there are lots of elements that you've got to look at when you speak about what appears to be a crime having been committed. First, you have to look at who the accused is, or the suspect, because until they are charged, they're not accused. There are different laws that apply to different people. Just two things, really. Is the suspect a child or an adult? If the suspect is a child, there are provisions that protect them under the Child Act of 2001. In the context of children, there are limits to what can be shared, whether as individuals or when we look at society, it's sort of like three levels. You've got government, you've got maybe corporations, and you've got the individuals, and we all make up society. So government enacts the laws and should properly enforce them and plug any gaps. And corporations in the way they project information, whether it is the media or it is, say, focus groups, what do you call them? These
think tanks.
Think tanks, yes, thank you. Must be cautious about how they speak about children. And we as individuals should also be cautious. The specific prohibitions against discourse in the Child Act is to do with mass media reporting. So if there's information that identifies the child in the media, that is a breach of the Act, Section 15. If there are pictures of the child, and when we speak of child, we speak of the suspect, the victim, and potential witnesses, anybody who is connected in some way to this event that could constitute a crime. So they are all accorded protections, that their identities are kept private, because they're children. They can't really handle the kind of media attention. They're in their formative years, so they need to be protected. The second aspect is when reporting or discussing or blogging or sending out social media messages, we need to be cautious, because every person is innocent until proven guilty, and they deserve the right to a fair trial. So while we don't have jury trials, a person's right to a fair trial can still be prejudiced through public discourse, because it influences potentially witnesses, prosecutors, and judges. So when we speak about a criminal event, shall we say, a crime that's occurred, we must be cautious not to prejudge what has happened. And we must always give that person that due rights, whether they are a person with disability or not.
Yeah. No, I would like to add that, because echoing what you've just mentioned, of course, the SOHAKAM, the Malaysian Human Rights Commission, actually has warned and urged the public to not share photos, images, videos, even like a snapshot of, even if it's not necessarily to viral it, but to just inform another person, this has happened. Actually just stop, because to be fair, as you mentioned, the Child Act actually protects a lot, and it's quite expensive.
Speaking of stigma, right, we often hear, right, when things happen, we hear terms like autism, ADHD, special needs being used very loosely after an incident. How harmful is speculation before there is a professional assessment?
I think it's very harmful for the same reasons that the Child Act, I assume, tries to implement these protections for, which is we end up labeling people, saddling them with certain kinds of cultural baggage, social baggage, emotional, which will then lead to certain types of emotional baggage being carried by the individuals being accused, even though maybe they've not even been charged with a crime, or it's not gone to court yet. And as Krish mentioned earlier, in these cases that, obviously we won't go into details, but they involve people who are underage, people who are children, who are still developing socially, emotionally, still developing as individuals, trying to find themselves. And so when there's a lot of this kind of speculation about who they are, what background they come from, what their motives might have been for supposedly, committing this act or not, that's going to weigh on them, that's going to weigh on the families and the individuals closest to them. And generally, long-term outcomes, it will only result in further harm coming to them, and maybe even other people who have been actually diagnosed with the conditions that you just mentioned, whether it's autism, ADHD, the public might start to have this perception of them as being one way, being more prone to, doing certain kinds of acts, having outbursts, etc., which are all unfair labels, and that doesn't just affect the specific individual in the specific case in question.
Yeah, sometimes you get this news or the confirmation online first before the actual lawyer or the actual, authority, the police saying something, right?
Yeah.
And it's in a way, for a lot of people don't necessarily know this, because then the authorities will need to work backwards. Instead of having to address the crime or the due process at hand, they have to actually maintain public peace right now. They tend to your queries. So this is the repercussions, basically, that a lot of people don't necessarily realize. If they share things online and you take part of the information warfare out there, right?
It makes stigma more pronounced. Where public speculation actually makes families less willing to seek help.
Betul.
Right, because they don't want to be labelled.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, yes, because the police has indeed said that, because the challenge actually is having to create that support system.
Right.
Because when let's say when you move 5 steps ahead, then suddenly something like this happen, then you're thrown 10 steps behind again, and then you're you have to restart somewhere, right? Because you're trying to build that trust, but then, a lot of people want to ride on the virality of things, and it doesn't go anywhere. But anyway, coming back to the discourse, I do want to understand this, because you mentioned about the Child Act, right? When earlier I said the Child Act was quite expensive, but it also covers adults or the guardian, basically, if they care for a child. You need to make sure that they are not exposed to, vulnerabilities. Does that also apply to let's say, familial sort of connection? Section 31 penalizes parents or guardians for abuse, neglect, or expose children to physical harm. But what if that person is not parents or guardians, as Section 31 imposes?
Section 31 talks about parental responsibility.
I see. So
parents have a special responsibility to their children.
Okay.
But individuals...
let's say the community, like the neighbors.
Community. Well, we all have a responsibility not to do harm. So if we do harm to a child, it is a crime, and it's punishable under the penal code.
Okay.
So anything involving whether a child or an adult, any harm, there are laws that criminalize it.
Just want to get it out there. Yeah. Basically, there are other forms of applications that can be imposed.
It's not. The Child Act is specific to people who already have duties, who are assumed to have duties, and it's about protections for the child as well.
But it's a collective responsibility at the end of the day.
I believe, a collective responsibility for all of us to act responsibly, not to harm a child or any person for that matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, another concern is that, especially when it comes to high-profile incidents, I won't say high-profile, but it's like national attention sort of incident, the possibility of increased stigma we've already discussed, right? But is there existing legal protection, especially to protect the PWDs here, the people with disabilities?
Everybody is entitled to a fair trial. And in order to give a person a fair trial, if they have a disability that limits their ability to engage and put forward their defense, then the courts, through various social and statutory provisions, will give effect to maybe remedies that will give them equal protection. For example, if the accused person is deaf, the court will provide a sign language interpreter so that they can participate in the trial. And there will be, sensibly speaking, there will be accommodations for a deaf person because they speak with their hands. So handcuffing them behind their backs is basically muting a deaf person. So these little things we may not think about are accommodations that must and should be made for persons with disability. A deaf person must be given use of his hands so that he can communicate with a sign language interpreter. A person who has mobility issues might need ramps to access the court, may be allowed, there are points in a trial where an accused is required to stand. So the person has mobility issues and can't stand, that will be excused. So there will be different adjustments. For persons who do not communicate verbally, they may have other ways of communication. Assistive devices might be provided to help facilitate the process. So in terms of disability rights in the criminal justice system, it is about assisting a fair trial, which is a right we all have. There's perhaps there are some things that do require change for persons with neurodiversity. For example, an autistic person.
Do we actually have enough like counselors or people who are trained to, okay, perhaps like Prashanth, you want to say something on this?
In terms of whether we have enough people trained, short answer is probably not. I think one of the statistics I like to cite, which probably has changed slightly in the last few years, is that when it comes to, again, broadening it to mental health professionals in general rather than those that deal specifically with autism, the WHO, as recently as 2021, they recommend that the ideal ratio for psychiatrists, for example, so the medical doctors specializing in mental health or psychiatry, the ideal ratio should be 1 doctor for every 10,000 citizens in a country. In Malaysia, as of then, maybe it's improved slightly now, but I can't imagine it's changed very much since then. In Malaysia, the ratio was 1 for every 100,000 citizens. In other words, we have only 10% of the ideal capacity for psychiatrists. That's psychiatrists. So people like myself who are clinical psychologists, who don't prescribe medication but who focus more on things like assessment and providing intervention and psychotherapy, this kind of stuff. The ideal ratio should be, according to WHO again, should be 1 psychologist for every 5,000 citizens.
Because in the earlier one was like 1 to every 10,000 was quite for the mental health aspect lah.
Yeah.
Even that, I'm like 1 doctor for 10,000. That's a lot, right? And then are you able to attend them?
And that's the ideal ratio, which we are only at 10% of that capacity.
Okay.
For psychologists, it's 1 for every 5,000, just because the nature of our work with individuals normally involves more time. You see them for a longer period.
Right.
So generally, you only are able to attend to less people at any one go. Again, still 1 for every 5,000, still quite a high number.
I mean, it's a worrying thing when, given the rise of mental health issues and things like that.
These are the reported ones, the ones that are not yet reported.
And this, we are talking about the general public, right? But out of curiosity, do schools have a legal duty to provide reasonable accommodation or reasonable, when I say accommodation, it's a broader term, for neurodivergent students? And what happens if they fail to do so? I mean, just...
Okay.
I don't think it's made mandatory yet, but they have a class khas of sorts, right? But it's not standardized across. So that's one of the gaps.
The Persons with Disabilities Act has a provision for this, and it's Section 28, which is access to education. So persons with disability should have equal access to education as persons without disability, and the government is having signed the human right the Convention on Rights for Persons with Disability in 2008 and ratified it in 2010, does have an obligation to make reasonable accommodation for persons with disability. And the PWD Act, for short, Persons with Disability Act of 2008, actually has a section on it, and that's Section 28. Governments do try to provide, our government, does try to provide reasonable accommodation in that they have classrooms, integrated classrooms, and also special centers for children who need more assistance. I believe that's present. So there's still work to be done, but the government is working towards it, and there are provisions. It's just that I think the Persons with Disability Act doesn't quite have enforcement provisions.
Right.
So it may get amended down the line. I'm not certain, but the right is recognised.
But do you think by having that sort of like the carrot and stick sort of measures, right, would actually put things into order better? Because logically you would think that the aspect of, or the argument of inclusivity, you don't need to have a penalty to ensure that everyone gets equal access, right?
Yes.
So it's so upsetting to hear this. Basically, because there's no enforcement aspect. Then you want to give more attention.
We hope that it will come, that policies will be formulated and it will be made more universal. But we have a starting point.
Okay.
So I think as a society, we should all push for better access, better rights.
Right. We talked about the person at hand, or at least the people surrounding them. But if you're like just a normal day by day like passerby and everything, and then suddenly you're exposed to like serious incidents, right? The trauma that happened afterwards, because not a lot of people talk about that. For instance, let's say in a particular case, a serious thing happened, like a stabbing, for instance, and then the kids or at least teachers, whoever witnessed it, who is supposed to be accountable or responsible in ensuring that their mental health is good without having to allow the noise that's coming in after, right? The buzz that's coming in after.
I think the bigger question is, based on what you just said, is whether teachers today are adequately equipped to recognize emotional distress or neurodivergence or whatever. I know we are mentioning a lot of neurodivergent, not necessarily, issues may not necessarily be because of that.
Yeah.
It's just one of those many reasons, right? But are we expecting them to carry responsibilities they were never trained for?
Are we expecting them to carry the load? I think, unfortunately, whether if you're a teacher listening or watching today, you might say it's not my job.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, probably, we need to kind of help teachers, equip them with some very basic knowledge and skills, because like it or not, teachers are basically acting as frontliners in this struggle. You are the ones who deal with kids, and this applies to parents as well, not just teachers, but other adults around the individuals. Like it or not, the statistics are what they are. Our youth and our teens and adolescents, they're struggling to a greater degree than ever before. A lot of the data when it comes to mental health, emotional challenges is bearing this out, and we need as many people to be involved, to be equipped with the knowledge, and some at least. We're not asking them to be mental health professionals.
Yeah, but just to identify the red flags,
right? To at least be aware of some of the red flags, the warning signs. What are the things you need to look out for when it comes to students who might seem like they are distressed, or if it's your child, what are the signs that your child might be in distress? I think the most effective holistic response to this very complicated issue will involve all of these individuals, and will be most effective when we equip them with the knowledge and maybe some very basic skills about how to provide some basic support.
So the immediate steps then, like if let's say in this case, like if you're not the victim, but like you're you witness a traumatic event. So what would be the next course of action?
If you're a teacher or
Both.
a parent. So, I mean, if you're the
towards
adults,
the kids lah.
if you're the adults looking out for the well-being of the kids, firstly, equip yourself with the knowledge of the warning signs or what the signs might be. And so, for example, these might include basically the broad thing that we're looking for is changes in behavior or changes from how the student or the child normally has behaved all this while. If they are suddenly losing interest in the things that they really like to do in the past, if they suddenly look like they can't concentrate when they are in school or when they are doing the work assignments or school assignments, if they are having trouble sleeping, if their appetite has changed, if if they express that they're feeling pessimistic or hopeless or very, very concerned or anxious about everything that is going on, taken together, all of these are some of the signs that we want to look out for.
Because sometimes parents and all, right, parent teachers constantly dismiss this as just being difficult, when they may actually indicate that the child needs professional support.
Absolutely. And
right?
I think hopefully if there's any adults or teachers or parents listening to this and watching this right now, try to put that perception on pause, because we don't want to overlook a situation where the child might actually be struggling and it might be something that needs to be dealt with, needs to be addressed, needs further support with, and we don't just want to sweep that under the rug, because what will happen if we do that is that will probably lead to harm in the long term for that particular student or child. So equipping ourselves with that basic knowledge, and then from there, what can you do when something like this happens? Well, we need to kind of then reflect on ourselves, whether you're a teacher or you're a parent, and you need to ask yourself, based on the relationship I have with my student or my child right now, does it feel like there is an open door, an open line of communication between myself and my child or my student, whereby do I feel like they trust me enough that if they are feeling uneasy or distressed or concerned, they feel safe to come to me? And we need to really reflect on that question honestly and contemplatively with ourselves. And the good thing is that regardless of what the answer is, whether it's a yes or a no, is that we have the power to do something, to try and open the door if we feel it is closed. And that starts by actually engaging with our child.
But I'm just curious to also understand, at least Chris, when you do your groundwork and everything, when you engage in dialogues, do issues or at least efforts when it comes to have parent to not necessarily overtake what the child, I mean, sometimes because the voice is taken away by the parents, if the parents is like a helicopter parent, right? Because when you're talking about this, right, and having to foster that kind of network or support system, then in my head, thinking out loud, it's just sometimes the PTAs, the parent-teacher association or the groups, they tend to diminish the voices of what these children.
They're used to doing it that way, I guess.
Because it's just a matter between parents and teachers, not necessarily about the child.
Parents, whether they have children with disabilities or not, we are a spectrum, right? We parent differently. As you say, some are helicopter parents, some are very laissez-faire, some are mid-range. I think as parents, being a parent myself, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and not live in our little silos and think our way is the right way. Parent groups, support groups are good. You have play groups and you meet other parents and you learn from other parents. So I think that society, more cohesion, more togetherness, more understanding is required for us to move into that space where we parent responsibility, because it takes a village.
Right. I was just about to say that, because we throw around the phrase, or it takes a village to raise a child. We always say that, but what does it mean if the village itself is absent? It's like what song, right?
Yes.
So what? Like there's no village.
But you can make your own village.
Yeah, understood.
The responsibility as parents is to some degree with us.
Right, yeah.
If we don't have sometimes now we're all the nuclear family units, right? It's just the parents and the child. We can reach out to, your neighborhood, your religious group, your church group, or your temple group, or your mosque group. Create.
If I can just add on to that, I think I wouldn't say the village is kosong. I think the village is full of people.
Yes.
It's just that the people within the village might be underinformed and, may not have the knowledge or the awareness yet. But once hopefully we are able to equip them with the knowledge and some basic skills and guidance, then the village already exists, in other words, and we should be able to support.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
We've come to the end of the show, but I do want to leave our guests with just one question, because ultimately the conversation obviously comes down to just one. How do we ensure that we actually build a system that's foolproof and protects everybody? Earlier, we spoke about within the confines of how to protect a child, right? But then the child will eventually grow up into becoming adults themselves. And then some will have their own individual pathways, right? Some starting families, some do not. Because a lot of things today is like the societal expectation is like, sometimes it's tough on the person having to grow from young to old. And then let's say if they do have family, they have child, so that's a legacy thing, right? So how do we ensure that the societal or the socioeconomic trajectory for a person is fair?
Well, the framework for us to work on this is already there, in the sense of when you speak about persons with disabilities, we have the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability. And so there are rights. When you talk about disability rights, right? Disability rights are not giving the person with disability something more than the average person has. You have to understand that the person with disability is at a disadvantage because they can't engage with society in the way that someone who doesn't have a disability has. If it's a physical disability, it may be physical limitations. If it is a learning disability, it may be an inability to participate in a certain type of activity. So the rights under the convention and the rights under the PWD Act tries to address that imbalance, to raise the person with disabilities up to equality with the person who does not have disability. So when you say disability rights, we are actually talking about human rights. It's just how do we give them those human rights? Yeah?
Interesting.
I'll speak mainly from the mental health and emotional well-being aspect, because I feel like there's a lot of work we can do. And again, as I said earlier, it's encouraging to hear that at least our elected representatives seem to be more aware of and are taking this issue seriously across the political spectrum. So I'm hopeful in that regard. I remember when some of the more high-profile incidents occurred last year, there were a number of people, netizens, and even public figures who came out and were saying things like, to solve this issue, we should bring back the rotan, or, and things like that.
Oh dear.
And at that time, from my professional and even personal perspective, it was a bit frustrating to hear people provide what I would call quite carelessly simplistic solutions to quite complex issues. So what we would like to see, I think I'm fair to say I speak for a lot of people in my field, is that's probably what we don't want to do, go back to bringing up, because there's no evidence to suggest that is actually effective. So then the next question we can ask is, what are the best models from around what is best practice from around the world? And we generally look to the West and especially the Scandinavian countries and Nordic countries for the most effective models in education. And as part of their education curriculum, they weave emotional well-being very neatly into their curriculum. As an organizing principle, I think they seem to emphasize that student well-being is almost just as important as academic outcomes or performance, maybe even more important. So if you start with that as your organizing principle, then that will trickle down into all sorts of other policies, which will include things like social emotional learning being incorporated into the curriculum, includes more mental health professionals being embedded into the school itself. Right now, you're lucky if you have one qualified counselor per public schools, we're talking mainly. And all the burden tends to fall on them,
just
as well as other teachers who, as you said earlier, may not be very well-versed or trained in the area. And I don't know if we're ready to have conversations about, changing the way school is done in terms of shortening the school day, minimal homework. That kind of stuff probably is further down the road in terms of cultural change. But it's these kinds of things, in addition to general mental health literacy, digital literacy as well. Now, a lot of our kids obviously live online, even with the social media ban that's come into force recently. That's not going to change that much. incorporating digital literacy, AI literacy into all of this goes together.
There are so much of noise, right, that surrounds all the news that has come up in recent times. In fact, like you said, even last year, there was still a lot of noise going around. A lot of people have got a lot of opinions, and a lot of things, from not respecting the child's need for protection, and so on and so forth. But if there is one misconception, right, with all this noise that's happening, if there's one misconception you hope Malaysians would you want to leave behind for Malaysians after listening to this conversation, what would it be?
I think working in the field, one of the biggest misconceptions we always want to try and eliminate is just this idea that if you have a mental illness or a mental health diagnosis, that you are more prone to violence, which is, I think, very relevant to the specific cases that have cropped up recently that we are here to address, because that's fundamentally untrue lah. If anything, people who have been diagnosed with any number of mental health conditions are far more likely to be victims of violence or harm. In school contexts, things like bullying, for example, they become easy targets in that kind of setting. So, because when there's a lot of noise, the noise tends to be, stay away from people who have mental health diagnosis, because they might, do something. And that, so if I can try and dispel one myth above all else, it will probably be that one. And in fact, it's the opposite that tends to be more true, which is they end up, being victims of harm or violence, etc.
Quite agree with what Dr. Prashanth says. I also would like us as a society not to other people. They are the other. They are disabled. They are a foreigner. They're a refugee. They are that religion or that race. We need to look at each other as human beings with all our differences and changes and be more understanding of each other. And I think with acceptance and understanding, you will start to see change.
Right. I mean, whatever insights that you've both presented today, I think it really drives home, especially in the context of having that the idea of the collective commitment is across the board and should be for all and not necessarily looked at based on labels, right? Yeah. Hopefully, this particular discourse is, able to bring some sort of motivation or a new light, or, renewed sort of faith of sorts to our audience, because the takeaway is, again, we're talking about the broader aspect of things, the nuance of the issue, not necessarily when a case happens, then you care about it. And once this whole thing dies down, then people forgot about the effort.
Because generally it's a knee-jerk thing, right? When something happens, people react instead of responding.
And
it's
the
a big
knee-jerk
difference.
impulse applies not just in cases like this.
Everything.
Well, beyond the headlines, if it doesn't tell you anything, that's exactly that. Well, thank you so much again, Prashanth and Chris.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, to our audience, if you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news report will be delivered to you. Now, follow us on our socials. We're everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, X, as well as TikTok. Now, today is basically a day ahead of polling day in Johor.
Right.
So if you guys are Johorians, there's a little birdie told me that the ETS has a discount, but I'm not too sure up until when. It's 20%. This is not a promo, by the way, but it's just another way for us to advocate for go and vote. That's your right to vote.
Go and
your
vote.
duty. Even if it's state level, go and vote, guys.
Go and vote.
Yeah.
Guys.
My name is Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Elena Koshy.
We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.